Have you ever gotten a phone call that felt like someone just ripped the roof off your life? I filed for divorce. The condo's already sold. No warning. No questions. And then he laughed, softly, like he'd just won a game of chess. But what he didn't know was, I wasn't on that board to play a pawn. I was there to flip the game entirely. You're listening to this story on Renvenge Zinnia, where truths that were once buried are told by the very people who lived them. If you've ever felt pushed out of a home, a life, or a love you helped build, this story is for you. And if you believe justice doesn't always need to be loud, hit subscribe and join me in uncovering what was never meant to stay hidden. My name is Danielle Carter. I'm 41 years old. I live in Seattle and have spent most of my career helping large corporations transition their finances toward real, sustainable change. I'm a senior ESG advisor. I work with boards, investors, and CEOs who believe they have everything under control until they're forced to realize they don't. I can't remember what Derek's voice used to sound like when he said sweet things, but I remember that voice, that call in Chicago, all too well. It was day 2 of the National ESG Summit. I'd had 3 closed-door meetings, 2 panel discussions, and a networking dinner that stretched past 10 p.m. And yet I felt sharp, because when you're doing something that actually matters, you don't feel drained. You feel fueled. The meeting room still buzzed with quiet chatter when I glanced at my phone. The screen lit up. Derek Hayes, incoming call. I stepped out of the main hall and into the east corridor, the quietest spot I could find. "Hey, Derek," his voice came immediately. No greeting, just flat, indifferent, and cold enough to freeze bone. "I filed for divorce. The condo's already sold. You should start looking for a new place." I thought I misheard. My pulse slowed, not because I was shocked, but because my mind was already calculating every word, every angle, every move. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, as if trying to shake the sound loose from my head. Then I brought it back. "What did you just say?" "I thought you were smarter than this," he laughed again, the smug chuckle of a man who thinks he's just pulled the rug out from under you. "You know that place was too small. Savannah deserves better. I sold it. Deposits cleared. Let's not make a scene." Savannah. That name sliced through the last nerve in my brain like a razor. I knew there was someone else. The sudden business trips, the 2 a.m. emails, the way he stopped holding eye contact for longer than 3 seconds in the living room. I just didn't think he'd be this blatant about it. My mind flashed with images of the 4 walls of that 14th floor Capitol Hill condo, half-finished dinners, times I adjusted the thermostat myself because Derek forgot, when I changed the light bulbs, when he said, "Let's just call someone tomorrow." I used to think we were dividing responsibilities. Now I realized we were cast in roles for a play I never got the script for. "You sold it?" I repeated, this time stressing the last word. "Yeah, no need to freak out, Danielle. Just stay at a hotel for a few days. I'll send over your cut." I took a long breath, not to calm myself, but to suppress the laugh rising in my throat. "All right," I said in the same tone I use for meeting minutes. "Thanks for the heads up." Then I hung up. No screaming, no tears, no trembling hands. Just me, standing in a granite hallway that suddenly felt less cold, because I felt something else. Freedom. Not because he walked away, but because I finally saw him. Clearly. In that exact moment, I knew. If he wanted to start this game with a stab in the back, then I'd finish it. By the book. We used to call it our nest, a high-floor condo in Capitol Hill overlooking Lake Union, quiet enough to hear the breeze, high enough not to see what you didn't want to on the streets below. Derek once stood by the window, his arm around my shoulder, and said, "We'll start here." And I believed him. I believed it all. Believed in him, in us, in the future we were building together. For 6 years, that condo witnessed everything I once believed lasting love should look like. I was the one who came home early to cook dinner, the one who refreshed the flowers every weekend, the one who remembered the plumbing inspection schedule. Derek, the so-called financial partner, had pitched in 50% of the purchase price. From that, he assumed everything belonged to both of us. Anytime I brought up ownership, he would just smile and say, "We're one, remember?" Once I asked him, just hypothetically, what would happen to the condo if things ever went south. He brushed it off. Why think so negatively? It sounded optimistic, but it was really just avoidance. Then this past March, we decided to refinance. Interest rates had dropped, and, like always, I handled the paperwork. The bank had a specific condition. To qualify for the best rate, there needed to be a single legal owner on the new agreement. It was a way to simplify the documents and reduce future legal complications. I suggested we temporarily transfer the ownership into my name. Derek agreed right away. Didn't even read through the documents. He was used to letting me handle the small stuff. I still remember the morning he signed, eyes glued to his phone, flipping through pages as I pointed. No questions, no hesitation. When he finished, he said with a smirk, "You really are the CEO of this house." Back then, I thought it was a sweet little joke. Now I know. That was the only time he ever spoke the truth. I didn't say anything else, because at the time, I still thought I had a husband I didn't need to doubt. As of April, the condo was in my name. I kept the title deed in a clear plastic sleeve, tucked into the last drawer of my filing cabinet, the one only I had the key to. I'd meant to tell Derek eventually, just for transparency's sake, but I never got around to it. Life moved on, and I was used to handling things solo anyway. Sometimes, when I reviewed our financial files for investment planning, I'd glance at that document, see the line that read, Danielle Carter, sole owner, and quietly exhale. Not out of secrecy, but relief. Because for the first time in my life, something was entirely mine. It wasn't a scheme, it wasn't a setup, but the day Derek said he'd sold the condo, I realized something. Some people you think are partners are only walking with you until the path splits, and once that fork appears, nothing is ours anymore. I didn't plan to call Michelle right away. In fact, I didn't plan to call anyone. The moment Derek hung up, there was a strange kind of silence around me, as if the whole world already knew what had just happened and was quietly waiting to see how I would respond. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my coat, opened my contacts, and scrolled down to a name I knew by heart. Michelle Liu. We met at UCLA. She went into law. I chose finance. 20 years later, I was consulting for corporate giants, and she was running her own law firm in Seattle, specializing in real estate and divorce. More than anyone, Michelle understood how my mind worked. Structured, strategic, never driven by impulse. Danielle? Her voice came through after just 2 rings. Chicago treating you well? It was, until 5 minutes ago, I said, cutting to the point. I just got a call. Derek filed for divorce, and according to him, he sold our condo. Wait, what? She nearly choked on the words. He sold what? The condo, Capitol Hill, where we've been living. And he thinks he can just sell a condo that's in your name? I smiled, my first real smile of the day. He doesn't remember it's under my name. Honestly, I don't think he ever truly paid attention. Good, she muttered, darkly amused. Then buckle up. We've got a legal surprise gift waiting for him. I immediately sent her a scanned copy of the deed, something I always kept stored in my private finance folder on the cloud. Michelle scanned it quickly and confirmed without hesitation. It's in your name only. Any attempt to sell or transfer without your consent is invalid, and if the buyer's already sent a deposit, he could be facing a charge of property fraud. I stayed quiet for a beat. You okay? She asked. I'm fine. I said slowly. He was planning to use that money to start over with Savannah, his assistant. That name finally came out. Michelle let out a cold laugh. Well, that fresh new start, it's about to get iced. I didn't respond. I just stared out the hotel window at a city still rushing forward, unaware that a woman had just had the rug yanked from under her feet and somehow still landed standing. I thought of all the times Derek brushed off the documents I laid out on the kitchen table, the refinancing agreements, the income statements, the terms I spent weeks negotiating with the bank. Every time I put a folder in front of him, he'd say the same thing. You're good at those tiny letter things. I just get a headache trying to read them. I used to think that was a compliment. Now I know it was surrender. Not just in finances, but in our entire marriage. I had spent years playing the role of the one who handles things, while he got to keep the posture of the decision maker. That call with Michelle wasn't just the beginning of a legal counterattack. It was the first time I fully understood that the name on that deed, that line that read sole owner, wasn't just a legal designation. It was identity. It meant that for the first time I had officially signed my own name on the life I was going to lead. I hung up. Then I opened my laptop and fired off an email to Michelle. Subject line, emergency response timeline. I knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the order Derek thought he was controlling and reminding him he was never the one holding the pen. I caught the earliest flight back to Seattle. I didn't read. I didn't listen to music. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, thinking about the condo, about the man who once lived there with me, and about the letter Michelle promised would land in his inbox first thing Monday morning. I unlocked the door with my fingerprint, just like always, same quiet beep from the smart lock. But the warmth was gone. I stepped inside, and the condo felt like an abandoned stage. Derek's armchair was still there, his expensive coat still draped over the armrest, but the air was different, like the space itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally be dragged into the light. I set down my suitcase, hung up my coat, splashed cold water on my face, and sat at the desk. On my laptop screen was a single folder labeled Housing Transfer, April 12th. I clicked it open, printed out the original ownership deed, and laid it flat in the center of the dining table. At exactly 6:13 p.m., the door opened. Derek walked in without knocking, like everything here still belonged to him. His face tightened the moment he saw me, seated and waiting. What the hell is this? He waved a piece of paper in the air. I didn't need to look. I knew it was Michelle's email. That's a letter from my attorney, I said without blinking. What kind of game are you playing? You really think you can block me from selling this place? This is marital property. I calmly reached to my right, lifted the deed from the table, flipped it over, and placed it right in front of him. Whose name is on it? I asked, eyes locked on his. He looked down, paused, then snapped, You tricked me. You transferred the title without telling me. You signed it, legally. The clause was right there in the refinance paperwork. I reminded you 3 times. You nodded. I printed the draft. You signed. Derek glared at me. You think you're better than me? This is dirty. No, Derek, I said. This is the first time I'm not being stupid. The air in the room turned thick, like glue. I could see his hands tightening, fists clenched, but he had nothing to fight with, because for the first time, he was on the wrong side of the law. I stood up and walked slowly toward the window. My voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. Your deal is void. The buyer's been notified. Their legal team is involved now. And if you've already accepted the deposit, I turned to face him. Don't expect me to stay quiet. Real estate fraud is enough to end your shiny little tech career. Derek swallowed hard. His lips had gone pale. I just wanted to start over with someone new. Why do you have to react like this? I looked him dead in the eye. Because you didn't just leave. You tried to walk out by selling something that never belonged to you, and you smiled while doing it." He fell silent. I ran my hand across the table, collecting the papers, neatly folding each copy, sliding them into a slim file folder. "You have 3 days to pack and leave. After that, the locks will be changed. Anything you leave behind will be shipped to your mother's address, according to the law." I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to curse. But his eyes, they trembled. Derek turned without a word, and in that one quiet step toward the door, I knew a part of the power he used to hold no longer belonged to him. Derek left the condo that night without saying another word. I stood in the living room, still holding the file folder, not out of emotion, but because I was already thinking about when to play my next card. I didn't waste time. The very next morning, Michelle and I sat down on Zoom to map out the details. "We'll file for divorce within 72 hours, she said firmly. "We'll include a full asset list and a clear proposal for division. And most importantly, the condo is non-negotiable. It's a separate asset." I nodded. This wasn't about a marriage falling apart anymore. This was a severance of power, a clean, airtight break, with no room for loopholes. I thought back to the past, to the times I'd tried to get us to sit down and plan long-term finances. Derek would always wave it off, say he was too busy, or mumble something like, "You're always trying to calculate everything. Just let life flow, Danielle." But letting life flow to him meant I handled it all. And now, he still thought I would keep doing that. Only this time, I was doing it to cut the very last thread. 3 days later, just as promised, I placed the divorce documents on the dining table. The same table where we once had candlelit dinners, where I once told him I'd been invited to join the National ESG Investment Council. He'd said, "That's great. Just don't forget we've got a home to take care of." I laughed back then, not realizing what he really meant was, "Don't you dare fly higher than me." Derek walked in, his face paler than usual, probably just heard from his broker. The buyer had officially pulled out. They were considering legal action. I didn't push, but I knew the weight on his shoulders was growing. He sat down, tapped his finger restlessly on the table. "What's this?" he asked, though he already knew. "Divorce papers. With a clear proposal. I retain full rights to the condo. It's under my name. All other shared assets will be divided according to state law. I'm not touching your company's shares as long as you don't touch anything that belongs solely to me." "You're really taking this to court?" He gritted his teeth. "Not if you cooperate. I don't want to drag this out, but if you delay things on purpose, my attorney's ready." He let out a chuckle, but it lacked the smugness of the call he made when he first dropped the divorce news. It was a dry laugh, the kind that echoes off a cracked mirror. "You're serious? Over this? Over a damn house?" I looked him in the eyes. "Number, I'm doing this because I've had enough, and because even now, you still think this is just a small thing." I pulled out a detailed breakdown. Payment records, bank stamps, a 6-year summary of my contributions to the property. Every line item labeled, who paid for the May plumbing fix, who covered most of the furnishing, who refinanced the mortgage. If needed, I can submit all this to court. But like I said, I'm not here to fight. I just want closure. Derek skimmed the folder, then shoved it away like it burned his hands. "I need time." "You have 48 hours. After that, I'll file a loan. And then you don't get a choice." I stood up. No more words needed. Derek remained seated, his head in his hands, eyes vacant. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt calm. Some victories don't need fireworks. Just one signature. And a chair no longer reserved for the man who left. That night, I cleared off the dining table, removed the matching plates, the wine glasses still stained with lipstick. I washed everything, carefully boxed them, and labeled the box. Memories, no need to reopen. Tasha, my best friend, came to spend the night. She brought 2 bottles of chilled white wine, a bag of sushi, and the same dress I wore the first time I spoke at an international conference. "Wear this tomorrow," She smiled. Let him see you didn't fall apart. I laughed, not because of the dress, but because I knew I had chosen the right person to sit beside me that night. We ate. We talked about everything, except Derek. No one said his name, like he was just a subplot in a book no one wants to reread. Before bed, I opened my calendar, circled Saturday in red, and wrote, "Deadline, sign." Looking at it, I didn't feel afraid. I felt light. For the first time in months, I slept, without waking up in the middle of the night. Saturday came sooner than I expected, not because time was moving fast, but because, for the first time in a long while, my mind wasn't crowded with conflicting thoughts. My head felt clear, like I had just wiped years of dust off a forgotten glass window. I brewed a cup of coffee, slipped into the olive green dress Tasha had brought me, applied a deep plum lipstick, and opened the windows to let the light flood in. The condo had always been beautiful, but without him in it, it was even more so. Around 11 a.m., the doorbell rang. I didn't need to check the camera. I knew who it was. I opened the door. Derek stood there, wearing the same dress shirt I used to iron for his countless presentations. But today, it was wrinkled, and standing beside him, a woman at least a decade younger than me. Her makeup was layered, her perfume overpowering. The same kind Derek once told me was too much when I wore it. A giant gaudy ring sparkled on her finger, and her smile said one thing. She thought she owned this place. "Hi," she chirped. "I'm Savannah. Derek's told me all about you. We're just here to grab a few things. Won't take long." I didn't answer. I simply stepped aside, let them in, and gently closed the door behind them. No need to say welcome. This wasn't a hotel. Savannah strolled into the living room, her eyes scanning every corner like she was taking inventory. She pointed toward the window. "This corner would make such a great yoga space. That view." I didn't respond. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, then turned to Derek. "Did you tell her this condo belongs to you two?" He hesitated, less confident now than the last time we spoke. "I just said I sold it. Everything's being sorted." I took a sip from my glass, set it on the counter, and looked him square in the face. "Actually, this condo was never sold, because it was never yours to sell. It's in my name, and I never authorized any transaction." Savannah's eyes snapped to Derek, wide with disbelief. "You said it was done. You said we use that money for the down payment on the new place." I walked over to the dining table, pulled a folder from the drawer, and opened it to the page that showed the cancellation notice from the broker. The buyer pulled out after discovering the seller didn't legally own the property. They're still considering a lawsuit for attempted fraud. Savannah paled. She turned to Derek, no longer playing the sweet little darling. "You lied to me? I wired the deposit. Don't tell me you used my name for a loan." I watched it unfold, but I felt nothing. I had already lost too much to feel anything for this scene. I just wanted my space back. I spoke up, calm but clear. "Savannah, I'm going to be polite once. This is my home. He has no right to bring anyone here, and no one has the right to stay. If you're not gone in 15 minutes, I'll call the police for trespassing on private property." Savannah's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she didn't argue. She grabbed her bag, gave Derek one last look. "You figure this out." Then she turned and walked out. No goodbye. Derek stood there, his hands clenched. "You humiliated me in front of her." I tilted my head, a half smile on my lips. "Number, I told the truth. If you feel humiliated, it's because you know exactly what you did." He stood for another few seconds, then left, taking nothing but his phone. The door clicked shut. That same afternoon, I changed the locks. When evening fell, I sat alone by the window, the one Savannah had claimed would be perfect for yoga. I smirked. This space isn't for dreamers. It's for those who live in reality and protect what's theirs. That day, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt closure. The kind of ending that doesn't make noise, but changes everything forever. Monday morning, I received an email from Michelle. The subject line was short, finalized. I opened the attachment. Inside was the full divorce file, my signed petition, the asset division summary, and confirmation from the court that everything had been successfully filed. One line made me pause. The documents will be formally served to the other party within 24 hours. Derek might not know it yet, but as of this morning, our marriage was officially over, and that was no longer my concern. I printed the entire file, placed it neatly inside a gray folder, and set it on the dining table beside a Mont Blanc pen, a gift from Derek on our 3rd wedding anniversary. The only thing that might still be useful if he remembered how to sign his name properly. I called him, left a voicemail. I've signed. It's been filed. If you think there's still room to negotiate, there's not. That afternoon, he showed up, alone. No wedding ring. But I wasn't wearing mine either. He stepped in, saw the folder and pen on the table, hesitated. "You're really going through with this?" I didn't answer right away. I pulled out a chair, sat down, rested my hand on the table, and only then did I meet his eyes. "You know," I said, "when you first called to say you wanted a divorce, I thought maybe it was a moment of panic, a midlife crisis. But then you brought another woman into my home. You lied to her, you lied to me, and still thought you had the right to decide what came next. So now, it's my turn to decide." He moved toward the chair across from me, but I placed my hand on it before he could sit. "Don't. That seat isn't yours anymore." He stood still, eyes scanning the condo. Once our shared haven, now a space that only belonged to me. He exhaled. "I didn't think you'd go this far. I thought maybe I could fix it." I stood, picked up the folder, walked over to him, held it out. "I don't need you to fix anything. I just need you to sign and go." He took it. His hands trembled. The pen was already there, waiting. He picked it up, and after a long moment, put ink to paper. I watched as the lines appeared, each stroke severing one more tie to a man who no longer belonged in my life. When he finished, he gently placed the pen back on the table. "I did love you," he said softly. I nodded. "Maybe you did. But love without respect is never enough." He stepped out. I didn't follow. I stood there, file in hand, watching the door close, and for the first time, it didn't feel empty. That night, I sat alone at the dining table. The seat across from me remained unoccupied. I didn't try to fill it. Instead, I opened my journal for the first time in months and wrote, "Today, I am no longer someone's wife, and I don't need to be anyone's wife to feel whole." Before bed, I stored the signed documents in the safe, not to preserve a memory, but to remind myself. Paperwork, when read carefully and signed correctly, can be the clearest form of freedom. The next morning, I woke up without an alarm. Sunlight spilled in through the tall windows. I made coffee, just 1 cup, and I didn't feel like anything was missing. Tuesday afternoon, I called a locksmith. A man in his 40s, wearing a navy blue jumpsuit, carefully removed each screw from the old lock. I stood in the hallway watching his hands at work, and for some reason it felt like I was undoing the last links of an old chain I no longer belonged to. He looked up and gave me a polite smile. "This new lock comes with fingerprint access," he said. "You're the only one who can program the first print." I nodded. For the first time in months, I was placing my finger on something that no longer tied me to anyone else. The door would open with my fingerprint, and no one else's. I closed the door behind me. No more twisting keys, just a small, sharp click. A confirmation that I alone now controlled this space. I opened the closet and pulled out a large cardboard box. Inside were the last of Derek's things, his old hoodie with frayed sleeves, the ridiculous collection of team jerseys he valued more than our wedding photos, and that cheap particle board table he insisted on keeping in the living room. I placed everything inside carefully. No anger, no tears, just cleaning. I called a donation service. The next morning, a small truck pulled up. The driver looked at the box and asked, "Do you need a receipt?" I shook my head. "Number, I'm not taking anything back." He nodded, loaded the box, and drove off. I stood on the porch and watched him go. The wind was cool, but not biting. I stepped back inside and shut the door. This time, I didn't even bother to lock it, because no one could get in anymore. I moved to the bedroom. The silver gray bedsheets were old. I stripped them off, folded them neatly, and replaced them with a new set, a soft olive green, gentle in tone, unburdened by any memories. Everything in the condo began to shift, one piece at a time, not out of urgency, not to forget, just because I didn't want to hold on anymore. That afternoon, I stepped out onto the balcony. The condo overlooked Franklin Park, a place where Derek and I used to walk hand in hand. Now I simply stood and looked. The trees had lost most of their leaves. A child was chasing a kite, his father laughing behind him. I didn't feel wistful. I just smiled, softly and honestly. That evening, I cooked dinner. For the first time in months, a proper meal. Just for one person, me, lasagna. The dish I loved but gave up for years because Derek was allergic to cheese. I ate slowly, without conversation, without wine, without pretense. Just the food, the chair, and myself. After dinner, I pulled out a notebook, not a journal, a planner. For the next chapter of my life, I wrote the first line in purple ink. Step 1, do everything I once stopped doing for someone else. I listed the smallest things: Wednesday yoga class, the end-of-month book fair, even the fall foliage trip to Vermont I canceled last year because Derek had a conference. I added each to my calendar. No checking with anyone. No wondering, is he free that weekend? That night, I opened an old playlist. The first song that played was Both Sides Now by Joni Mitchell. I used to listen to it with my mom the summer I turned 15, when she too was going through a divorce. When the lyric came on, I've looked at life from both sides now. I didn't cry, but I understood. The next morning, I got a text from Derek. I left some things behind. Can I stop by to get them? 3 hours later, I replied, I've donated everything. If there's anything you still need, please go through your lawyer. No reply, none needed. I called Chloe, my financial advisor, and said one simple thing: open a new file, not joint assets. Label it mine. Chloe laughed over the phone. Welcome back, Danielle. And I laughed too, for the first time from somewhere deep inside. That evening, I sat at the dining table and looked around the condo. No wedding photo, no pair of glasses waiting side by side, but there was new lighting, a new rug, a single-seater sofa I always wanted but was told we didn't need. Everything now was chosen by me. I reopened an old email account, one unread message from my sister, sent last week. Are you okay? If you need anything, say something. Stop going silent. I replied, I'm okay. I'm starting over, and I won't stay silent anymore. Just then, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. It was the delivery guy with the canvas I'd ordered last month. I had forgotten, but somehow it arrived right on time. I opened it. An abstract painting in burnt orange, rusted yellow, and deep indigo. The colors of fall, the colors of letting go. I hung it on the wall opposite the front door. So now, when anyone walks in, it's the first thing they see. No wedding portrait, no shared mirror, just this painting. Chosen by me, hung by me, and reflecting the version of me I've become. I picked up the notebook again and wrote the Sia. I started each morning with a cup of chamomile tea instead of rushed coffee. Not because I suddenly wanted a new taste, but because I no longer needed caffeine to chase after anyone but myself. One morning, while tending to the plants on my balcony, something I'd put off for 3 years because Derek said, "Plants just make a mess," I realized this apartment was coming back to life with me. I bought a new desk, small, simple, but with drawers. Space for things that belong to me, not to a relationship. I placed it by the window so the sunlight could hit every page I wrote, every project I planned. I scrolled through an old photo album on my hard drive. There were pictures of me smiling, really smiling, before I learned to press my lips together because Derek said gummy smiles look tacky. I printed a few of those photos, framed them, and placed them on my shelf. I also bought a vanilla and cedar candle. Derek used to complain was too strong to breathe near. Now I light it every night. No one's here to protest. A few weeks after I changed the locks, I got an email from Morgan and Yates Corporation, the company I once pitched an ESG transition plan to, a project that was shelved after Derek intervened. Now they wanted to meet. No middleman, no Derek, just me. I showed up to the meeting in a stone gray suit. Not because I had anything to prove, but because it fit me, felt light, and let me stand tall without forcing anything. The meeting ended with a firm handshake. A senior director said, "Danielle, we should have listened to you from the beginning." On my way home, I stopped by the old bookstore on Jefferson Street. I used to love that place, but Derek always said it was damp and cluttered. I walked in, found a smooth leather journal with a brown cover, and bought it without thinking twice. At home, I wrote the first line inside. Step 3. Reclaim every space I once shrank myself to fit someone else into. I also bought a vintage reading lamp, warm yellow light. A silk shade, the kind I'd always loved back when I was single. Derek once called it granny-ish. I thought it was softer than any compliment he'd ever given. Chloe, my financial advisor, invited me to a Women in Finance seminar. I stood in a room of over 200 women and shared my story. Not the story of someone who got left behind, but of someone who refused to be erased from her own home, her own life. A woman in her 60s took my hand afterward and whispered, "I wish I'd done what you did when I was 39. But today, I realize it's not too late. I smiled, not from pride, but from knowing that maybe, somewhere in that room, someone else had just placed her finger on a brand new lock. That night, I got home and opened the door. The lock responded to my fingerprint, mine alone. No more men's shoes by the door, no shirts tossed over chair backs, just the scent of lavender oil and soft music playing through a small speaker. I opened the fridge, filled with everything I love, a wedge of brie, purple grapes, a chilled bottle of white wine. No more, I can't eat that. I flipped on the hallway light, a bulb I had picked, casting its glow onto the canvas painting on the opposite wall. I had replaced the living room rug, too. Earthy yellow tones, subtle patterns, no old stains, no shadows of the past. I called my mother. We hadn't spoken in almost 4 months. She said, "I read your interview. I'm proud of you." My throat caught, but I simply replied, "I know. I'm learning to be proud of myself, too." In the middle of the living room, I turned in a slow circle. Every corner reflected someone I used to hide, me. I picked up my journal and wrote the 4th line. Step 4, stop asking for permission to be myself. And I knew. I was doing just that. I no longer remember what Derek's voice sounded like when he said gentle things, but I remember his voice that day, that call from Chicago, with perfect clarity. "I've filed for divorce. The condo's sold too. You should start looking for a new place." His tone was calm, almost triumphant, like he'd just won a chess match. I used to think those words would crush me, but I didn't cry. I just said, "All right. Thanks for the heads up." I thought that was the lowest moment of my life, but it wasn't. Turns out, it was only the overture to a symphony of independence I would write myself. Last week, I happened to scroll past a post on social media. An old friend had shared Derek's wedding photos. with Savannah. In the comments, someone asked, "Is he still living in Capitol Hill?" Savannah replied, "No. We're renting temporarily while waiting on a mortgage. Turns out he didn't actually own the condo like he said." I didn't laugh out loud, but inside me, there was a knock. Software, but echoing. I opened my journal and wrote line 5. Step 5. You don't need revenge. You just need to stand far enough away for people to reveal themselves. Another day, as I stepped into the office elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirror. A cream wool sweater, sleek hair, eyes that no longer avoided anyone's gaze. I whispered to myself, the woman who once thought she lost is now rewriting the rules. And I was. A podcast producer reached out asking me to share my story. They called me the woman who reclaimed her home, and then herself. I declined. Not because I was afraid to speak, but because I no longer needed a stage. This apartment is wide enough for me to walk, step by step, choice by choice, change by quiet change, into the life I never needed permission to begin. I taped a small note by my desk. Only those who've been underestimated truly know the value of standing alone. I didn't need Derek to lose. I just needed to make sure I didn't lose myself. And maybe the greatest loss isn't a home, a wife, or even a divorce. It's the arrogance of thinking you've won without ever understanding the game. I closed my journal, poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window. The one Derek used to scoff at when I said I wanted a window seat. Now the bench is there, and I fit into it perfectly. You thought you won, but I was never playing to win. I was playing to find myself again. I'm not telling this story to be pitied. I'm telling it because I know somewhere out there, someone has sat in their own room and still felt like they didn't belong in it. I once put my faith in someone who never read the fine print, who didn't care for details, who never thought he'd need an exit plan. And I once believed that if I just loved hard enough, I'd never be pushed out of the game. But here's what I learned. No one can take something from you if you know exactly who it belongs to. No one can kick you out of your own life. If you're willing to stand up and change the locks, if you're hearing my voice right now and you've ever been left behind, ever been erased from the house you helped build, just remember this. You don't have to play to win. You just have to make sure you don't play against yourself. I'm not the strongest woman out there, but I'm someone who learned how to give myself a new name in my own handwriting without needing anyone else to co-sign it. And if I could do it, you can too.